I might look foolish.
Yes! Yes!
My feet are a little bit cold.
Yes!
So I just recently read the Gospel According to Improv.
Oh, that idiot.
As you can see, I have highlighted several pages.
Oh, to use against me. Perfect.
Found a lot of interesting things in here that I really would like to hear a little bit more about. So,
Sure. Yeah.
First of all, how did the book come about?
So, it's funny. When you're a priest, like you get a sabbatical every, I think it's 6 years. Like not a full year, but like a good chunk of time. And I was realizing that I was due back when I was in Texas. And I was trying to plan a sabbatical for 2020. You can see how this is going to end, right? But I was trying to plan a sabbatical for 2020, and I planned on going to Austin and taking all these improv classes and stuff like this. But all the improv classes are in the evening, so I was like, what am I even going to do during the day? Like if I take improv classes for my sabbatical. And I was having that thought while I was sitting at my computer, and the email button, whatever, dinged. And it was an email from a publishing company that apparently had heard about some of my speaking about improv and ministry and was like, this may sound crazy, but have you ever thought about writing a book? And it did sound crazy. One of the things that, you know, if you know me, you find out pretty quick, is that I have dyslexia. And so I never, ever imagined that I would write a book, and it scared the living out of me. But I talked to some friends and supporters and asked them what they thought, and they were like, do it. You know, like how often do you get a chance to write a book and have another publisher publish it and not self-publish it and stuff like that. So that was originally my plan, and then the pandemic hit and I couldn't take my sabbatical when I originally planned, but I ended up pushing it back a little bit, about a year or so. So I think it was 2021 that I ended up taking that sabbatical, and that's when I wrote the and because of the pandemic, all the improv theaters were closed. So it really was just me. It ended up me writing the book was pretty much the whole sabbatical, but it was lovely. So, and really it was just my try, like over the course of my ministry, I've come to really see and believe in how God shows up in congregations and in pastoral care and in communities. And I found that like this improv stuff, like the classes I was taking and the skills that they were teaching, were really invaluable for creating spirit-filled community. And I wanted to be able to share that. So really it was about like me chronicling the lessons of my first, I guess, 10 years as a priest. But the improv, like there's a lot of books out there that are about like improv and church and theology. But most of the ones that I've read always seemed a little stilted to me. It seemed like the author wanted to make a point, and then they were using improv to be able to make that point. But for me, because I was growing up both as a priest and an improviser at the same time, they really are integrated. Like I don't know how to do one without the other. So that's what made me think that I might actually have something to say on the improv theology perspective, right? That it wasn't that they really did this sort of yes and process and community formation process really have affected the way that I see God, the way that I experience, the way I do ministry, and the way that I experience community.
But how did you stumble into improv?
Oh, that's a completely different question, right? So, when I was newly ordained, I got this gig straight out of seminary at this beautiful, huge church, St. Paul's in Indianapolis, and during my early tenure there, the rector was removed for misconduct, which is like a big deal. And then the senior associate rector, that's the other priest on staff, had to take a leave of absence to care for her husband, who had Alzheimer's. So with less than 6 months experience as a priest, I was the only priest of this church with an average Sunday attendance of about 350 and an endowment of over $30 million, right? And I wasn't running the church, but I was the only priest there for a little bit. And then you go through the whole process with an interim. It's complicated. But really, having seen this, the rector who was, I went there to have him be my mentor, right? And nothing against him or any of it, but I went there to have him be my mentor because I wanted to learn from him. And I guess I really did learn from him because I sort of looked at the way that I was patterning my work life right after ordination, and I realized I was burning the candle at more ends than it had. And I realized, if I'm going to do this ministry well and for a long time, I need something that's going to get my brain out of this ministry. That's one thing I really believe. If you're going to do the thing you're called to do, you have to find other things that you can do just for the love of it. Mm. And so I was like, I need a hobby. And I had taken an improv class when I was in middle school. I thought, I'm a pretty dramatic kind of guy. I thought maybe about theater for a second, but I didn't want to have to learn the lines. So I can't remember exactly how I stumbled upon this international chain of improv theaters called Comedy Sports, and there's a great one in Indianapolis, and I just signed up for the level 1 class, once again with no idea that it would end up changing my priesthood, but more I want to be able to meet people that are not all my parishioners all the time, right? When you're a priest, you always have to be a priest first. We can be friends, but I have to be a priest first, right? But I felt like I needed to find a community of people where I could be a priest second, right? And it's funny because I was taking these classes to get away from the church system, but then they ended up really growing together and in me in a profound way.
One of the first chapters, or the first chapter, talks about embracing the awkward.
Yeah.
And that can be so difficult sometimes.
Well, and it's funny because that was the original title of the book. So apparently, the things you don't know, things I didn't know. Apparently, when you write a book for a publisher, they get to choose what the title is. The author doesn't. And my original title for the book was Lessons in Awkward. And if you read it, the way it's structured is very much like that. It sort of begins with the best things in life are awkward, saying I love you, saying I miss you, will you forgive me? Can I forgive you? All the basic things of life, right? The spiritual things of life. The best things to get there is always you got to walk through the door of awkward. And so one of the things improv taught me is that awkward is easier if you practice. And improv is a practice in awkward. So you get used to the feeling and you get used to the understanding of the feeling. And then over time with other people's support, you begin to realize when you push into the fear a little bit, that's often when the most brilliant stuff comes out. So, and once again, it's one thing to know that intellectually, but it's another thing to train your body and how it reacts to these kinds of situations. And that's what that's one of the things that improv gives us, is this like, not just intellectual understanding of how to create, but this embodied way of experiencing the process of creation together as a community.
And I would think that it would help too, just in interacting with people. Instead of being afraid to go up to somebody because it could be awkward, or when something awkward happens, is, you look at it with a different perspective.
I mean, I'm still afraid. I'm just used to it.
Okay.
Or more so than I used to be. And I don't claim to be an expert in humanity by any means, but I do know that I am able to take more risks and to be more honest and more present, I think, because of this practice, right? Than I would have otherwise. So, yeah, I mean, that to me is the gift of it, right? And which gets back to the spirituality stuff, right? Like, how do you find the life in this moment?
Right.
And the connection in this moment, both to the person you're with and to whatever's beyond, right?
Yes, and you talk about sharing and
Good job, you said yes and.
Yes, and you talk about sharing in other people's reality, of being present in their reality. Yeah. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, so I go into exquisite detail in the book about this like concept of yes and, which is the base concept for improv training. The idea that whatever your partner is doing, whatever is around you, you accept it and then you build on it. So you say yes and then and. And in the book, I think I have a chapter on yes, a chapter on and a chapter on the comma between even.
Yes.
Yeah. So like I said, I go in a lot of detail, but on the most basic level, what improv teaches, what the improv process teaches you to do, is to accept the reality that your partner's giving. So if we were to come in to a scene and you were to pull a gun on me, if I were like, that's not a gun, that's a fish, right? Like we can't have a conversation because we're not living in the same reality.
Right.
Right? But if you pull a gun on me again, I can go, oh, and then like all of a sudden, like we're living in the same reality. Or pull the gun on me again, beep, like I'm Superman, right? Like, so, but even then, right, your bullets may not be able to hurt me, but I'm still living in the same world as you are. What I personally found was a sort of discovery that we spend a lot of time as human beings arguing over what reality is. Vestry meeting, so the church board. What does this church need to grow? Do we need young families? Do we need blah, 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 blah? Like, or do we need rock music? Or do we need good old tried and true, right? Like, and oftentimes we end up arguing over what we think is true about the world. Okay. Or what we think is true about, like same thing's true in politics, right? You've got different ways of seeing the future of the country, the reality of the country, and then people argue over which one is true. And as long as you're arguing over reality, you can't actually build something together. Right, and the same because at that point is like, because as long as we're arguing over whether that's a fish or a gun,
right,
there's nothing we can do together, other than argue, right? And that's not interesting. What's much more interesting is like, I think, or in improv is accept the reality that you're being given, and then jump into it and see what's next, right?
Okay.
And then and I find that as a pastor, especially in counseling and stuff, when I'm able to step into someone's reality, that's when the truly transformative stuff happens. I tell a story in a book about how I was talking with a friend of mine who's just a lovely human being. And she had a really difficult passed growing up, and that's putting it painfully mildly, right? And she got into some detail with me about it because I was her friend and I was a priest, and we were sort of talking, and really there's just like a lot of abuse in her household, but they were also like a nominally Christian household, right? Like they went to church, and it was a big show about how they looked like the perfect family, even though all this stuff was going on. So, and so she said to me, like we're talking, and she said to me, like, to me, that's always what God is. That's what God is, right? Like that's what I learned that God was. It was like a big fake front for my abusive family. She didn't put it quite that clearly, but that's what she was saying. You know, we had just finished coming out of an improv class together, and they had talked about yes and, like joining people's reality. And so I decided to try something without even really thinking about it. I decided to try something. I think, you know, oftentimes as a pastor, I'm tempted to be like, no, that's not the way God is. God loves you, which is something I believe, right? But if you're like, God hates me, and I'm like, God loves you, we're arguing over the nature of reality. We're not getting anywhere, right? So, but in that moment, instead, I think in part because I had this like idea, I decided, well, what is God to this person? Not necessarily God to this theologian, which is me, but to that person. So I thought about it, and I thought how awful her experience of God in church was. And so I said, of course you don't go to church. That God's an asshole. And she laughed. And ultimately, we ended up sharing a lot in our faith together. And it was very healing for her and for me. Because I realized, like, while at every point I believe that God is good and loves her, right? My ability to put aside my own notions of reality and step into hers allowed us to find a new and greater, wider reality together, right? It got her unstuck and me unstuck at the same time. And I think that's actually one of the biggest mistakes that especially American evangelical Protestantism has been making, where we're constantly trying to tell other people to believe where Christians are often trying to tell other people to believe the way we believe, as opposed to like going into the beliefs and experiences of those people with enough faith to believe that God is going to show up in the midst of it and guide us to the larger truth.
So everybody has a different life, a different story.
Well, and I actually believe that everyone has a relationship with God.
Yeah.
And so by stepping into your understanding of your relationship with God, I can understand more about the God that I worship because of our connection together, right? And just because I step into it doesn't mean I get stuck there. And just because I step into it doesn't mean that I give up on everything else that I've ever believed. And just because I step into it doesn't mean that I've signed on to our ability to be stuck in this one experience, right? But as long as I'm outside, we can't move forward. We can't move forward together. In the same way that, like, in the story of the Good Samaritan, right? Like, there's this guy in a ditch, and a priest walks right by, and a Levite walks right by. The religious, upstanding people walk right by. But then this other person, a Samaritan, who in the time wasn't viewed very positively by Jesus's audience, he gets into the ditch with the guy. And that's where they find charity and transformation. And so to me, like, I sort of wonder if that's true for the physical pain of the guy in the ditch, how much more true is it for the spiritual pain of our neighbors? Right? Like, how do we get into the spiritual pain of our neighbors? How do we get into their ditch? But that takes a lot more faith than just saying, get yourself out of it, or pull yourself out of the bootstraps, or let me throw a prayer into the hole with you, right?
To get in the ditch with them. Yeah.
But at the same time, like, I believe that that's what God does. I mean, that's the story of Jesus as I understand it, right? Like, God could have just lived in heaven, but instead decided to become a human being and share this life of with us, which is also a life of beauty, right? But in some ways I can only see the beauty because God decided to get in this ditch of humanity with me.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And I never really thought about the incarnation. That's what the seminary term is for what I was just talking about, right? The incarnation. In that way before, but all of a sudden I realized, this is what God is doing throughout the Bible, and over again. When often we expect to be judged, what God does is get into the ditch with us. And if that's what God does, and I claim to want to be like Jesus, then like maybe I should start working on that.
Yeah.
But I don't know how to do it all at once. So I practice. Being awkward.
Practice being awkward.
Going into those places, right? That like, you know, sometimes the fear tells you not to go into. But sometimes that can be helpful too. And naming the awkward and experiencing the awkward is part of how you find the beauty in the moment. It's also how you find the beauty in the connection. That's part of the momentum that pushes the book forward. To me, or push myself to actually write this thing, which was scary as heck for me to do, because once again, like, there's nothing more embarrassing for me than to hand you a handwritten note.
Because of the dyslexia?
Oh my, you can't read it. It's illegible. And if you could, you'd realize all the spelling errors. Like, it's awful.
How do you write a book when you have dyslexia?
With dyslexia comes advantages as well as disadvantages. So the creativity part of writing a book may actually be easier for a dyslexic.
Okay.
And in fact, like, the book pretty much existed in my head before I took the sabbatical. It was just a matter of typing it. Forcing myself to sit down and actually type the thing, right, was in some ways the hardest thing, because I'm always thinking about this stuff. But a part of that's because I'm always preaching, I'm always leading, I'm always trying to figure out how to do this divine stuff better. And I just loved the way that the community formed in the early classes. I loved the beauty of the spontaneity, discovering something, seeing the things come together that none of us planned. And the more that I learned to rely on that in improv, the more I started to see it happen in church life.
You talk about play a lot.
Yeah.
For adults, sometimes that's kind of difficult. So why is play important?
Why is play difficult?
Because we believe that we're supposed to always be serious in work and be productive and not just take time out and do something fun.
Yeah, you know, I think that that's like one of the really interesting things to me is like this idea that it has to be painful in order to be good, you know, which isn't true. And it isn't close to true. You know, if you think back, I mean, anybody watching this or you, think back on your life. Think about like the times that you've learned really neat things, or the times that you did something in your work life that you really was meaningful to you. It probably was fun, at least on some way or some level. And in fact, like, one of the things I sort of talk about in the book is I think that play is actually an instinct that God gives us to learn. Play isn't taught to children. They just seem to do it.
And they learn from it.
And that is literally how we learn, is by play. I say play is the best teacher. Right. And if that's true in childhood, why wouldn't that be true in adulthood? in theology, we talk about the Spirit at work, but I find myself more and more interested in the Spirit at play. Because the other thing is, like, once again, open up your Bible. Jesus is really playful.
See, most of us don't see that in the Bible.
But it's right there. Every time he tells a parable. The parable of the Good Samaritan.
Yes.
So he tells this story, and he knows the religious league guy is supposed to be the hero, not the hero. Other guy might be kind of the hero, not the hero. This guy that you're not going to like at all, hero. Like, you know, and every one of the parables is a playfulness. Parable of the prodigal son.
Yes.
Right? Usually people tell the first half of that parable and ignore the last half, which I think is interesting. But the last half is where it really gets playful. Right? So you got this father, and his son, his youngest son, is like, dude, I want your money as if you were dead. Give me your cash now. And the father says yes, which is nuts, but does. And then the son goes off and makes bad decisions, ends up feeding the pigs, which if you're a Jew is like really bad. And then ends up saying, like, I would rather just live as a slave in my father's house than here. So he decides to go back and apologize, and he rehearses his apology, and all of that's, and so Jesus goes through all this thing, and then he shows up to give this apology he's rehearsed, but before he even gets a chance, the father runs, grabs him, hugs him, puts on a robe and a ring. So all of a sudden it's like, okay, so it's playful. Once, like, because we're attaching with this younger son, because we know what it's like to be full of grief, but then to have this overwhelming playful response of like, let's party, right, is what the father says. And then the older son gets resentful and goes out, and the father goes out and says, you know, like, I've always loved you, all I have is yours, and we've got to celebrate because your brother was basically dead to us, and now he's alive. You know, the father is playing with the younger son to figure out that he belongs at home, and he's playing with the older son to help him figure out what family is. And he's playing with his audience, mainly the religious establishment, to have them let go of their ideas of what is right and righteous and see the people see God's children around them. Rarely can you get to that point if you're arguing over the nature of reality.
Right. Because what I see is we are supposed to be good and work and do what we're supposed to do, and we will be rewarded. And then here's somebody who comes in who does not appear to have done that, and they are rewarded. So it's that.
Maybe Jesus is playing with you too.
Maybe so.
Because once again, like, his audience is all designed. I mean, his audience for that parable, we know he's talking to scribes and Pharisees. So it means that we know the people he's talking to are like the older son in this story, right? Which means they're struggling not with temptation, but with resentment, right? Yes. And resentment is just as much of a spiritual killer. And in fact, in the Gospels, more so, right? Jesus' struggle is almost never with the sinful, it's with the self-righteous, right? But you can't just, it's like arguing over whether it's a fish or a gun, right? Like, unless you step into their reality. So he tells these stories to step into the reality, and then he plays with them to try to reveal other ways out. And with them, and not just with them, but with us, as we continue to read it. There's so many times that Jesus is playful or witty in his teaching. There's so many times when he could have just said the thing, but instead leads people to think for themselves and make their own decisions. Why? Because he's entering into the world around him. he's living his incarnation, not just from a theological perspective, but from a tangible, like teaching strategy perspective.
Okay.
Or at least that's what I see. And so I want to emulate it.
And you say Jesus was a yes man.
Did I? Yeah, that
Yes.
sounds like it. Yeah, I mean, once again, he spends time with the people that nobody else will spend time with, and that's what gets him in trouble.
Exactly. This is what you write in here, and I just thought it was really a good way of putting it. Jesus wasn't murdered for what he rejected. Jesus was murdered for who he accepted. He was brutally tortured and killed in the most painful and humiliating way imaginable because he hung out with the wrong people.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know how you can read the gospel and come to any other conclusion.
right.
I'm not saying that you can't, but I don't know how. What is really threatening to the world around Jesus, not the sin, it's the self-righteousness is what the real danger is, right? Because that's what leads him to kill him, is because of who he accepted, not because of what he did.
Right.
You also say mercy is unfair.
By definition.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because if it were fair, we would just call it justice.
Ah,
Right?
okay.
Like-
right.
And when I talk about justice from a theological perspective, it is a merciful justice. Don't get me wrong, whatever. But mercy implies that you could be harder, but you're not, which means you're treating better than fair. You're being treated better than fair. Jesus is constantly playing with this idea where people are like, but that's unfair. Well, but maybe the way you're being treated is better than fair to begin with, right? And once again, parable after parable after parable plays at this, right? Because it is the human, in the fallen world, it is a human temptation to always look for mercy for oneself and justice against their neighbor. And Jesus finds all these different ways of showing his community that that's silly. And one of the things I love about improv is that it exposes the games that people play so fast. I remember once when I was on stage and there was another character that was mad at my character. And I immediately shifted the circumstances so that my character wouldn't have to deal with the anger from the other character. And in that moment, I realized, oh, I really am uncomfortable with people being angry with me. And I really was, and some extent am. But this is what I sort of talk about. Improv is like a real-time Rorschach test, right? How you react to things shows you what's inside.
Self-discovery.
Right. And it's funny because you discover yourself through playing a character, right? It's supposed to not be yourself, but you're always there, right? So, and I really realized this is rough. What I didn't realize at the time, because I was new in my priesthood, is how much being able to take somebody else's anger is a really important part of ministry or just life. But for whatever reason, I was really afraid of anger, as opposed to just being like, okay, you're angry, you can work your way through. I mean, I'm not afraid of sadness. Like some people are, like you can cry and it does not bother me, and that happens a lot in my ministry. It happens my whole life. But for whatever reason, I don't freak out when I see someone cry, but I still do somewhat, but a lot less so. But originally, I would freak out a lot internally when I felt like someone was angry at me. Angry was uncomfortable. Angry at me was unacceptable, right? But I can't really know you, and we can't really have a real relationship if you're not allowed to be angry with me. The most prominent form of prayer in the Bible is lament, which is people telling God off. People being angry with God and expressing that anger with God. But I feel like the Christianity that I was sort of immersed in in America taught me that I could never show any negative feelings towards God, right? And that would be terrible. But why do I think that God can't take that? There's a folk singer, kind of in your face folk singer named Ani DeFranco. And she's got a line in one of her songs where she's talking about art. And she says, art is why I get up in the morning, but my definition ends there. It doesn't seem fair. I'm living for something I can't even define. And I always got stuck with that line because it reminds me a lot of being a Christian. I'm living for something I can't even define, right? So, and especially for those of us who like do the church thing, like, and dedicate our life to this thing we can't define, how is it, like, how do we even know or measure or recognize a difference that we make? That's actually like difficult. This soul care stuff is a thing. How do you know that how do you know or learn to trust in even the process itself, right? So once again, it's like, what does it mean? Like, what is it we're trying to build or bring? And in the book, I sort of talk a little bit about the fact that we don't know what to count in churches. Like, we kind of count attendance, maybe annual, maybe giving, right? Financial position. But it's very difficult for us to figure out how to count the stuff that really counts. So I don't claim to like have the answer to that, but in the book I sort of suggest that maybe the way to start is to think about the people that you look up to. Like, think about the people whose spirituality you admire and what are the aspects of those people. And so I invite the reader to do what I did, which is I sat down and I actually wrote names of people and I wrote aspects of those people. And I was like, okay, like this is, and I try to put them together into this image of what it is that, because I can't tell you what a disciple is, but I can tell you about the people that I believe to be disciples, right? So I was like, let's go about it backwards. So I took the people and I created this like whole thing, trying to figure out what it is that we're aiming at church. And I sort of had my own things that try to describe it, like an emotional reaction to their experience of God in their life, the ability to both give and receive love. That last one was it took some work to get to, and a number of other things. And so I had this list of things, and then somewhere along the line I remembered that the Bible actually talks about this. And Paul, he talks about like, what is it that, like, when the Holy Spirit is alive in you, like what are the virtues that come out of it? What are the fruits of the Spirit? So then I go and I look at the Bible and I'm like, oh, here are the fruits of the Spirit. So I try to connect what I created to what is in that list and put those things in communication. I encourage the reader to do the same thing. Which is, I think, useful if you're trying to put together a description of what a disciple is. And I can tell you, be more loving. But how do I tell you how to be more loving? Right? Like, I can tell you that the fruits of the Spirit are love, joy, compassion, self-control, persistence, these things that are in the Bible. But how do we actually become more that way?
Explain rat.
It's like a mouse, only bigger. So I talk about a concept that me and some of my other clergy friends came up with. I feel like a lot of times in church, we're trying to find the right, this is the class that you need to take, or this is the book that you need to read, or this is the workshop you need to do in order to say, I'm a disciple. But how did Jesus make disciples? He spent a lot of time with the people, like every day. And I don't know that I think we've been trying to build a better mousetrap in terms of how to build disciples, but we don't actually know any better way than just spending a ridiculous amount of time together. Because it is in those playful and agenda-free moments that I've found to be the most productive in the development of my own soul and in my care of other people's souls. It's rarely the things you learn in the class that I teach. It's almost always the things we chat about after the class is over. You know, that tends to be, I mean, if you think about it for yourself, like, where are the transformative moments in your life?
Right.
My guess is they're almost always in the margin spaces.
It's the connection with those people, getting to know those people.
Which happens once the agenda is closed
Right.
and put aside.
Right. There's a couple of lines in here that just stopped me in my tracks. This one says, "We are all beloved of God," which means anyone can be brilliant and beautiful, but no one can be brilliant or beautiful without someone to tell them they are. I love that. It goes back to that connection.
Well, and it speaks to the spirit of the rat that you were talking about, right? The ridiculous amount of time is because it's when you have relationships that you hold each other up, and then that makes a difference. So one of the things that was revolutionary for me in my own improv experience, there's this game called 5 Reasons. Okay, and so one person turns to another person, and there's like a whole group of people, right? One person is, and they're like, "Give me 5 reasons why something. Give me 5 reasons why Rocky Mount is the best place to live." And then everybody goes, "Oh!" And then you have to come up with 5 reasons off the top of your head. They don't have to be right. They don't have to make sense.
Okay.
They don't have to be words. But you're supposed to say 5 different things. And after each thing, whatever you say, the whole group will yell, "Yes!" And when I first started playing it, I spent most of my time when I wasn't on the spot trying to imagine what I would say if I was. So as they went around the circle, give me 5 reasons why St. Andrew's is the best church ever, right? And like, so I start thinking like, okay, what would I say if I were in that spot? So I was like trying to practice in my own head. And the game was like pulling teeth. And when it came to me, I was always like, "Ugh." Now, it was fine, because when I'm like, "Ugh," everybody's like, "Yes!" Which is great. But one day I was playing this in a class. It's like a warm-up, so we do it a lot. I was going to say priest, the teacher said, I want you guys to really focus on saying yes when the other person speaks, rather than thinking about other things. And so I realized at that point, it's like, oh, I'm not doing what I need to do for my scene partner, like by practicing. I should really try, and so I was like, and so sure enough, I started saying the biggest yeses I could, like trying to be really in it and enjoying the moment. And then I found that when it got to me, I was able to come up with things that I never was able to come up with before. See, I think that the key to creativity is getting in my head, but it's not.
It's getting out of your head.
It's getting out of your head and into the reality with your partners.
In that
right?
present moment, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I found that the creativity came much more fluidly when I would focus on supporting my partners than when I would focus on trying to make sure that I could that I could look okay. And in that way, like, your partners do better, but you do better too. It's not a zero-sum game. So tell me, 5 reasons why you regret agreeing to do this.
I might look foolish.
Yes! Yes!
You may never want to do this with me again.
Yes!
Regret. my feet are a little bit cold,
Yes!
and I'm being watched by my husband.
Woohoo! Oh, man. You know, and it's one thing to be put on the spot, but when you know, like, it's from a supportive perspective, it helps a lot.
Yes. And I feel like this church is that way. The people in this church are that way. You are definitely that way.
Well, and shouldn't it be that way?
Yes. Yes. And I think that's what so many people are searching for. That's what I was searching for.
So trying to create a community that's focused on that kind of not just acceptance, but like trying to create a community that of people that are lifting each other up, as opposed to climbing on top of each other to
Judging
rank at the
each
top.
other. Yeah.
That is really how I believe that we learn how to be disciples, or whatever you want to call it, right? Like, and in the book, it's interesting. So the beginning, I wrote the book with a different structure than I think makes sense. And I actually talk about this in the book. So section 1 is yes and. And then I had these 2 other sections. One was what it means to live, like how you think about discipleship on an individual level. And the other one was like how to lead a group. Or lead a community in a way that creates this kind of overarching. And so I still think that logically the way that it works best would be section 1 would be yes and, section 2 would be living yes and individually, and then section 3 would be creating communities of yes and. But when I started doing that, it always felt backwards. And I think that's because we don't just become, like, it's the community that forms us. So I wrote the book in this sort of bizarre way and sort of explained it. It's like, because there is no way to learn how to live, you can't actually be a disciple on your own. Discipleship, we often say, is caught and not taught. Right? Like, it is and in fact, my wife, Becky, she's just done some fantastic work around the saints. And one of the things she pointed out to me, that saints come in bunches. In my mind, I think of a saint as someone like, goes off and like, I don't know, takes out bricks and puts themselves in a wall so they can maybe just spreads of food back. There is an actual saint that's like that. And she may be an exception to what I'm about to say. But for the most part, saints don't do that. It's Francis and Claire. It's the friends that work together that help each other go after this great thing. It's community that makes sainthood, which is very counterintuitive to American Protestantism, but is not counterintuitive to most of the history of Christian thought. Like that it is in the space of community that we actually find ourselves and our place and relationship with God and our neighbor, which seems like it should definitely be true if when we ask our God and Savior, what's important? And he said, love God with everything you got and love your neighbor as yourself, right? Like right. That should speak to, like the second half of it speaks to community very strongly, right? And that your spiritual path is bound up in your relationship with your neighbor. And that's true over and over again in the Bible, but not necessarily in the way that it's often talked about. In my experience, especially in like the 1990s version of Christianity as it was being shared.
And sadly, more people are isolated. It's getting worse instead of better, it seems like.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult for me to comment on like larger trends and stuff. Certainly more people are non-affiliated. Sometimes I wonder if that gets at our difficulty of counting, right? Like, because once again, you can count attendance, you can count you can count money in the bank, but you can count the people who say check Christian on a checkbox. But I've been doing this a long time. I'm about to come up on my 17th year as a priest. And we have no metric for discipleship, because certainly people calling themselves Christian doesn't mean that they've been transformed by the reality of Christ, right?
Right.
And I think, once again, like, that was one of the things that was big in the 90s. They wanted people to say, I'm a Christian. Jesus is my Lord and Savior. And I think that they also wanted that to be true. Mm-hmm. But we didn't talk about whether it was true. We talked about whether or not you would say it. But the miracle of faith is not created by incantation. It's not just you say the words and it becomes right. Like, it's not a magic spell. The miracle of faith happens when God plays with you and you start seeing the world and your experience of the world differently because of it. Or at least then that's my experience. And I found in my ministry, I started actually like making disciples. Like, I would have these people and we'd spend a ridiculous amount of time together and we'd be talking about this thing, and I would start to see like real spiritual healing happen in their lives. Like different ways of seeing, different kinds of patience, different ways of loving, different kinds of like the fruits of the Spirit we're talking about. I started seeing really change in my people over time. And almost always that was tagged to, once again, the ridiculous amount of time, but more importantly, that was tagged to this like ongoing spiritual transformation. And it has ups and it has downs. It's not linear.
And I think what you said is so important about people have different ways loving, of being kind. You know, they show kindness differently. They feel things differently. Everybody's so different. And getting to know each other in that ridiculous amount of time is how you figure those things out.
Or begin to see them from a different perspective too, right?
Right.
I don't think I talked about this in the book, but one of the things I teach, one of the things I teach clergy is I'm always like, no one likes change, everyone likes an upgrade. Uh-huh. So that in itself tells you that it's really how you see the thing that matters, right? So a lot of times congregational leaders try to make change, and what that really means is argue you away from your sense of reality, right? But if I joined you with where you were and then we looked together at where we might go, you would see it as an upgrade, right? So so once again, change requires you to shift your understanding of reality. Upgrades require you to expand your notion of reality. One is a lot more attractive than the other. I would love to start a Rocky Mount improv troupe. And I could, and it would probably not be skillful, but it would be entertaining. I would love the practice. I just think it's great. And it is also the way I do everything in my life. But, so it's not just improv anymore.
But improv doesn't mean showing up unprepared.
Well, it depends on what you mean by prepared. When I talk about like improv as part of all my life, it really comes back to the quote that's on the very beginning of the book. Like there's a cover page or whatever with a quote from the Bible that says, "Love does not insist on its own way." That gets at the core. Like when we insist on our own way, when we prepare in a way because we need to make it go the way that we planned, that's when we lose touch with the miracle of the moment. So I preach without notes. And it's not like I haven't thought about it and made a like structure and a plan in my head. But when it comes to the actual moment of preaching, I feel like I need to be there.
Present. So you're saying,
like I actually preach different depending on, like if I'm preaching and you're in the pew and you go, like I'll change what I say without even thinking about the fact that I think about that. Like, but I'm constantly interacting with what I'm seeing from the pews, which is difficult because a lot of people, when they're listening, they look bored. But even if it's just me seeing how you're chewing on the information, or me seeing like what, or hearing what makes people laugh or what people doesn't, like that changes the way that I am in the moment with what I try to say from the heart. And the reason why I preach without notes is because I find that if I don't mean it, I can't remember it. So I don't say things I don't mean.
Oh.
Because I can't remember them. Everybody preaches differently. My point isn't that one should preach without notes. My point is that, like, are you going to be present with your agenda, or are you going to be present with the people? Love does not insist on its own way. I think that sometimes we have I think there's a real idolatry about planning in our culture. I think we think that plans are better than spontaneity. And sometimes that's true, but not anywhere near as often as one thinks. When they sort of teach you pastoral counseling, somebody talks about a struggle they're having, and then somebody else says, well, God has a plan. And to some people, hearing that is very comforting. And to some people, it's awful. And God has a plan that you suffer. That doesn't sound nice, right? But to other people, like, God has a plan, he's going to see you through this. And especially once in the 90s, there was like a big thing of like, have faith in God's plan. But if we had faith in God, why would we need to have faith in his plan? Like, and that's really what improv should, like, to me, like, as I get into the improv, like, I think God is in it with us and has infinite resources for creativity and blessing and all those things, which means, like, I don't sit there thinking, like, is this going according to God's plan? It's whether or not I'm playing in a good capacity with God. Like, and I feel like improv opens that up too, because then you're walking still to the world of discovery as opposed to just the world of performance, which to me is a much more spiritual place to be. But because if you're telling yourself what you really need to do is believe in God's plan, then what you believe in is the plan, it's not the God. I think that's so interesting that we're not like trust God, we're like trust God's plan. It tells you that, like, trusting God is not good enough. And I don't even mean that as an attack. Like, it's not, because it's not easy. And it's not natural. It's awkward.